Okay, welcome everyone who's on. We're going to go ahead and get this started. So welcome to the Raise the Wage Digital Town Hall. We're going to have the next hour and a half if we need all of that time, if there are 1,000 questions that come in. Otherwise, we can go until about 8 to discuss the Raise the Wage campaign in Vermont and to learn from a number of our speakers, legislators, policy analysts, and activists about this campaign. So my name is Grimm, and I'm the Political Engagement Director at Rights and Democracy Vermont, which is one of the 30 organizations that are part of the Raise the Wage Coalition. And this coalition came together over a year ago to organize and advocate for raising the minimum wage to a livable wage in Vermont, which we are not at currently. We're well below a livable wage. Doing so would have a huge and positive impact on low-wage workers and on local economic growth. And this would be one of the most powerful ways for us to combat the rising inequality in our state and in our country. So the Raise the Wage Coalition has grown since we formed over a year ago to include a number of groups focusing on a lot of issues that all share this goal of raising the minimum wage. We have women's rights organizations, groups focusing on children's well-being, racial justice organizations, groups focusing on hunger and homelessness, low-income advocacy organizations, the majority of the major unions in our state, and we all share this goal of raising the minimum wage for over 80,000 workers in our state, ensuring that our jobs allow working people to meet the basics to support themselves and their families. And this is not just about doing what's fair, though that's obviously crucial. This is also an important measure for us to boost local spending and local economic growth. When families in our state can better provide for themselves and their loved ones, that spending will stay local, that'll create more jobs on our main streets, and that will help our communities not only to be healthier, but to be more economically sustainable. I would say Senate Pro Tem Tim Ash said it best when he was recently quoted in VPR just last week, saying there's no policy right now that I'm aware of that compares with the potential magnitude of benefit is increasing the minimum wage. So just a little bit about myself and how I came to this. I started with Rights and Democracy as just a canvas director a little over 2 years ago, and I knocked thousands of doors in almost every town throughout this state. And I had amazing, though sometimes challenging, conversations with folks at their doors or in their kitchens or their living rooms. And I would ask people some pretty basic questions, like, do you think people deserve a few paid sick days a year? Do you think people deserve to be guaranteed paid maternity leave or paternity leave when they have a child? Do you think the minimum wage should be a livable wage? And guess what? The vast majority of people I spoke with answered yes to those questions. So why is our minimum wage effectively lower today than it was in the 1960s? Why are a third of our workers making below a livable wage? This is because there's a huge disconnect between the values of our people and our communities and the policies that dictate our working lives and our economy. So the point of this digital town hall now is to allow people to listen in and join from anywhere in the state to talk about the why and the how of raising the wage in Vermont. So just a little quick bit about why. This is a key step the legislature can take to enact policy that works for all Vermonters, not just our wealthiest and most well-connected. It's clear in our state where our income of the top 5% in our state, which is over $300,000, is 12 times that of the bottom 20%, where 1 in 10 Vermonters are living below the federal poverty line, and where wages haven't kept pace with basic expenses like food, housing, childcare, healthcare, that Vermont's not working for all of us. We have folks today who are paramedics, preschool teachers, nursing assistants who aren't even paid $15 an hour. And it's not a coincidence that many of these lower paying jobs and folks in the food service industry are more often women than men. This is an issue that's disproportionately impacting women and people of color in our state, and it's impacting tens of thousands of hardworking people all over, men, women, young folks, older folks. Though people would be surprised to know that 88% of people making minimum wage or just under 15 in the state are actually over the age of 20, and 45% of folks making under 15 are over the age of 40. So this is something impacting a lot of people. This is something that can make a really positive change for a lot of people. And then the how, we'll get into that later, but I want to give some time for some of our great speakers who are going to join us tonight to go more into detail on why this is important in Vermont, how this is a part of a national movement to make inroads into addressing inequality and benefiting workers in our state and fighting back against the national right-wing agenda that's attacking workers' rights, and to talk about legislatively how we're going to get there. So we'll be joined by Bennington Representative Kiah Morris, Chittenden County Senator Debbie Ingram, Stephanie Yu, who's a policy analyst with Vermont-based Public Assets Institute, Yannet Lathrop, who is a policy analyst with the National Employment Law Project out of DC, and Elise Greaves, who is our lead organizer at Rights and Democracy. After the speakers give their presentations, we'll have time to answer questions from the audience, from listeners. So please feel free to ask any questions you would like answered in the chat function on the Zoom meeting. Some folks did send in questions early, so I will bring those in as well. And if you're calling in, feel free to email them to info@radvt.org, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. So I would love now to introduce Elise Greaves. Elise was born and raised in Hardwick. She's a UVM grad, and she's been working with us at Rights and Democracy basically since we started. And she was one of the key organizers of the Women's March in Montpelier in January, which you may remember because it was the largest march we've ever had in Vermont's history. So thank you for joining us, Elise. She's going to take my seat, and I'll get out of the way here. Thank you. Okay.
Awesome. Hi, everyone, and thanks for that intro, Isaac. So I'm Elise. As Isaac said, I'm the lead organizer with Rights and Democracy, and I also work with Isaac on a lot of our Raise Up Vermont campaigns. And so I've lived in Burlington for several years now, but I was born and raised in Hardwick, Vermont, and moved to the big city to attend UVM as a first-generation college student. And I'm here tonight because this is an issue that is very near and dear to me. And actually, up until I started working at RAD in 2015, this was an issue that impacted me personally. It's an issue that I grew up with, and it's also an issue that I see many friends, family, and fellow young people struggling with, and working 2 to 3 jobs at poverty wages to make ends meet. And many of the young people I know, did what they were supposed to do and went to college and got an education with the promise that that would provide them with the opportunity to thrive economically. That's what I was told anyways. But we're not just talking about young people, of course, and we're not just talking about folks who are fortunate enough to actually be able to attend college. Though it's important to note that nearly half of those making poverty wages in Vermont right now have some sort of college education. But the reality is that right now, of the 85,000 Vermonters who don't make a livable wage, nearly half, as Isaac said, are 40 or older, and 62% work a full-time job. And this is also an issue that disproportionately impacts women, single moms, and people of color in Vermont, and that really continues to drive a cycle of poverty in our state. And while many folks associate positions like the retail and food and beverage industries with young people and first-time job holders, a low-wage worker's average age is 38, and that is actually who is, overwhelmingly employed in those positions. And we also see these impacts taking its toll on our communities in a number of ways. But in the past several years, we've really seen, the despair and not being able to get ahead intensify our growing opioid crisis in every corner of the state. And I think it's really rare these days to meet someone who doesn't know someone who is struggling or has struggled with addiction. And many of these issues, homelessness, incarceration, hunger, access to education, you name it, while there are many factors at play, of course, they can all be traced back to poverty and low wages. So, obviously raising the wage is one of many issues that we need to tackle to improve the lives of tens of thousands of Vermonters who are struggling day to day, and to create a Vermont that actually values work and workers, and to really move away from this lie of meritocracy that we've been sold on. So it's a great place to start. And while we're having these conversations about livable wages, it's also important to talk about how we can really be organizing for the long haul to build an economy that puts people first. So raising the wage is an investment in Vermonters and in Vermont communities, and we all have a very important role to play in making sure our state gets a raise. So thank you for being here tonight.
All right, thank you, Elise. Just to remind folks that if you have any questions you want to ask, you can just put them in the chat function on the side, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So we very much welcome people's questions, and we have some people that are very well equipped to answer them. So up next to speak on the Vermont picture, on why, in terms of Vermont's economic picture, this is such an important campaign, is going to be Stephanie Yu. Stephanie currently works as a policy analyst with the Public Assets Institute, which is a Vermont-based research and policy nonprofit which focuses on tax, budget, and economic issues in our state. She's worked both as a public and private sector fiscal analyst in the past, serving as budget manager for the Michigan Department of Treasury and as the executive director of the West Virginia Commission for National and Community Service. And she has a master's in public administration with a concentration in nonprofit management from the University of Southern California, and has done amazing work on research of Vermont's economy. So Stephanie, you will be up next, and let me get her screen set up. So I have that here, and whenever you want to share your presentation, you're good to go.
Thank you. Thanks. Hi, everybody. Sorry for the switcheroo, but too many cameras going at the same time means that there's all kinds of echoes in here. So we're just going to tag team it here for a minute. So thanks for the introduction. And, I think Isaac gave a pretty good description of what Public Assets Institute does, and probably many of you are familiar with our work. But I just want to add that, a lot of our fiscal analysis and our economic policy analysis is really looking at how these policies affect low and moderate income Vermonters in particular, but also what are the sort of systemic barriers for people that prevent them from accessing opportunity. So those are the pieces that we look at, and you're welcome to check out. We have all kinds of things going on the website at publicassets.org. But for those of you who know us, you know that we love charts. So I am going to put up some charts. You can bear with me here. So hopefully you can see this. Let's see. Full screen slideshow. Bear with me for a second. Work? Okay, everybody can see that, and hopefully I know how I can advance them. So just briefly, I think my role here is to really just kind of give you, like Isaac said, some of the economic context for raising the minimum wage in Vermont, what we've been talking about, some things to think about, and why it's so relevant. So the first piece is, and this is a slide that some of you may have seen before, but this is really what we're talking about. This is the current state of income inequality in Vermont. So what you can see is that it used to be that the bottom 99% got a lot closer to their share of economic growth. And now if you look at since the most recent recessions, most of the economic growth is going to the people at the top. So, and in fact, in the recession, in the growth period right after the 2001 recession, more than half of the growth went to the top. So the point is that income inequality is growing in Vermont and across the country. And it's not just that income inequality is unfair, which it is, but it's also that it has a dampening effect on the economy. So it slows economic growth, it causes poverty, it reduces social mobility. So it has a lot of sort of ripple effects that affect all Vermonters. So the next one, and this one is, again, something that some of you may be familiar with, but this is, we talk a lot about, and Isaac mentioned what a livable wage would look like, and we do calculate a livable wage every 2 years in Vermont. The Joint Fiscal Office does this and kind of establishes what that level is, what we refer to as the livable wage. And you can see that the 2016 livable wage was well above, at $13.03, was well above where the current minimum wage is now at $10 an hour. But the larger point of this slide is that they calculate what a livable wage is for each family type. And what we call the livable wage is really what it is for somebody in shared housing with no children. So no family to support and shared housing. So you can see every other family type, their wages would need to be much higher in order to support their family. So for, say, a single parent with a kid, you're talking about $30, $35 an hour that they would need to earn. And so when we're talking about the minimum wage, we're really talking about a floor that, it's sort of the starting point for what people need to have a livable income. But for a lot of other families, there's other things that need to come into it. So this isn't the only policy change that we need to ensure family economic security, but it's a pretty good starting place because it does serve as that floor. So I think Isaac referred to this too, which is that the minimum wage is not getting any closer to the livable wage. So over time, it's kind of gone up and down, but the gap has really persisted. And so right now we really have, it's right around about just around 70% of the livable wage. So, but you can see that gap is persistent, and we don't have, we're not really getting closer. So, the Minimum Wage Study Committee, which has been meeting and talking about this, as I'm sure you all know, hasn't sort of raised this question of whether the minimum wage should be a livable wage. And our answer to that is sort of a resounding yes, that people who are working full-time should be able to support their families. But we also recognize that the minimum wage is really a floor. And what we need to be able to do is also have other policies that help people make sure that they have an income sufficient to support their entire family, whatever that family might look like. The last piece is, I think, part of what a lot of the conversation in Montpelier has hinged on, which is when you get to $15 an hour. And that's sort of the critical question, because the when really determines whether or not we're moving people closer to a livable wage and helping their families, or whether we're just kind of staying afloat, or whether we're actually maybe even falling further behind. So on its own, so this is all, we project out what the economic growth will be, and this is all the Congressional Budget Office projections of growth, but bottom line is, left to its own devices, the minimum wage, which in Vermont does grow with inflation after next year, would get there by 2034 on its own. And then we've seen various proposals in Montpelier. I know the coalition has talked about 2022. We've seen proposals for 2026. What we're looking at is, I think there's a range, and we want our goal, rather than focusing on when we get to 15, our goal is always to get to a livable wage as soon as possible. So the sooner we can do that, the better. And a livable wage now, which is again that $13.03 for 2016, would mean that it would hit $15 an hour roughly around 2024. That's not a hard number. A lot can change with economic growth, but that's sort of the ballpark of what we're talking about. So really, sooner rather than later is what we're shooting for. And like we say, that's sort of the fight we're in now. And while we want to get to 15, we want to get there soon, we also have to make sure that it just continues to grow with the cost of living, so that our families continue to have economic security. And then, as I said, I think there's also a whole package of policies that we need to make sure that families have economic security at all stages of life. So, this is one part of it. We need to ensure livable income for every family size, and there's lots of other pieces that we need to get to. So that's sort of a fight for another day. I know we're focused on minimum wage, but we just kind of wanted to give you some economic context and some sort of food for thought about how this process should look and what we're actually trying to achieve with the minimum wage. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Steph. Okay, I'm gonna take that screen share off. Okay. So yeah, thank you again for sharing, and thank you for that context. There's a number of really good reports that you can find on Public Assets website, and I believe y'all are going to be working on some further research over the next few months on that, correct?
Absolutely.
Great. So next, to help give us a picture of the larger national economic situation and the larger movement to raise minimum wages and push back on economic inequality, is going to be Yannet Lathrop from the National Employment Law Project, or NELP. NELP has done legal and policy research and advocacy for nearly half a century in support of policies to create good jobs, expand access to work, and strengthen protections and support for low-wage workers and the unemployed. Yannet formerly worked with the Michigan League for Public Policy as a policy analyst, specializing in wage and poverty issues. She's worked as a writer for the New School for Social Research, as a communications associate for the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. And she has, I think, if I've read this right, 2 masters from University of Toronto and the New School for Social Research. So knows what she's talking about, it seems. She's actually come and testified in Vermont to the study committee and given really powerful testimony. So really psyched to have Yannet with us. And you're up. So thank you for being with us, Yannet. Is her video still working here? Let's see.
Can you guys see me? I'm right here.
Let me turn my share off. There we go. Yep, now we're good.
Okay. So are you guys going to do the slides for me?
Yep.
Or should I?
Shay should be able to bring the first one up. We have in the background, Shay Totten, our communications director, is helping to manage the video. So he should have that up in just a moment. And yep, so we have your slide up now.
Great. And sorry, I forgot to change the date and who I'm presenting this to. So you can ignore the Joint Fiscal Office Minimum Wage Study Committee part and the October 2nd part of that slide. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is just a graphic of the type of wage gains that we've seen over the past 5 years since the Fight for 15 began in late 2012. This is an illustration, but it doesn't really show like to what extent there has been a lot of progress, especially in the localities. I don't know if you can see that, but there, for example, in California, there are some highlights of some of the localities and the state that have increased their minimum wage to 15 plus, or sorry, to 13 plus. And there are several others in there in California as well that do not show on this picture. But this is just to give you a sense of just how much the Fight for 15 has won over the past 5 years, and how much of an inroad it has made into not just the coast. The coast tends to be a little more progressive, a little better able to do these sort of better policies. But it also, as you can see, it has also made some progress getting into the more like the inland part of the country. We haven't gotten 15 everywhere, but because of the Fight for 15, we have won several wage increases throughout the country, including in some places in the South. As a result of the Fight for 15 and of the appetite for better wage policies, about 19 million workers have benefited, not just from these policies, these the laws, but also from private companies being pressured into raising their starting pay as well. So overall, 19 million workers plus have benefited in total so far. About 10 million of those are benefiting from 15 minimum wage policies that are phasing in at right now, and about 7 of those will be at 15 next year. So that's a pretty good news, I think. And the total wage increase that these workers have gotten is about $62 billion, or that's the raises that they will get once their minimum wage policies are fully phased in. So that's a really positive picture, I think, and there's more to come. Vermont is one of these states that we are hoping will also get to 15. So there's a lot more to come over the next couple of years. Next slide, please. This is just to give you a sense. This is just a selection of some of the campaigns that that we expect or are already ongoing. Many of them, as you can see, are for 15. Did I put anything? So there are a couple of them that are a little bit under 15, for example, 12, etc. But overall, the picture is more and more states are going to 15, are going to be really fighting for 15. Massachusetts is one of the neighbors of Vermont. Vermont in some ways is really the campaign there is really strong, and they're really striving for a $15 minimum wage bill. In Maryland as well, there is going to be a campaign that will be launched at the beginning of next year for 15. In New Jersey, I don't know if you guys have heard, but in New Jersey, there has been a public commitment for 15 from the incoming governor. And I know that in Vermont, you guys have also gotten a commitment from the Senate president on 15 being a priority of his on a personal level. So that's really good news. So if Vermont has a minimum wage increase, it will join the states and localities that have already increased their minimum wages to 15 or so. But you guys would also be leading these other states that are trying to do the same out of this selection of the states in this chart. Next slide, please. And I know that you got a context, a local context from the policy analyst prior to me speaking, but this is just another way of looking at what is really needed by many residents in Vermont. As you can see, this is based on the Economic Policy Institute's family budget calculator, but as you can see, today already, many workers who are either single or parents are already in need of 15 today, and this includes rural Vermont. By 2022, the need for a high wage will be even more, it will be even stronger. And as you move further along the line with inflation eroding the value of the minimum wage, you will really need a wage increase that is going to be a little bit steeper. So the sooner that Vermont can face in a $15 minimum wage, the better. Obviously, we do not want to cause negative economic effects. So the legislature will have to be mindful of the economic situation in Vermont. But the sooner for residents of Vermont who are struggling, the sooner that a $15 minimum wage is phased in, the better. And so that's all those are all the slides I have. I can, if you guys have any questions, I can answer, or if you, Isaac, want me to present on anything else, just let me know.
Okay, thank you. I think if we have questions that are brought forward that you feel you can speak to, that would be great. And I think that really helps cover a lot of what the national movement has been, the gains that it's brought about, which are incredible. I mean, $62 billion in wages for workers, that is unbelievable. And we really have a chance to have Vermont continue in that same movement. Also it's not only about the, increased money in the pockets of our lowest paid workers, but that money getting spent locally. So something that one of the major economists in our state found earlier this year when they were studying was that there'd be $240 million more dollars spent locally and generated on local economies in Vermont if we raise the minimum wage to 15 an hour. So, the benefits kind of expand beyond just addressing inequality and supporting more vulnerable workers. This will, the benefits reverberate beyond that. So thank you so much, Yannet. So next we're going to have Representative Kiah Morris speak. If you don't already know, Kiah is a representative from Bennington, Vermont, in the south of the state, very close to the border with Massachusetts. She is an advocate around many justice issues, has done a lot of incredible work around domestic violence, has served as the vice president of the Bennington County Coalition for the Homeless, has worked on the Head Start Policy Council in Bennington, and has been a leading voice on both economic justice issues like minimum wage campaign, but was also a lead sponsor on the racial justice reform bill, which was an incredible victory in the past legislative session. So Kiah is a champion on a lot of really important issues, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about the minimum wage campaign. Thank you so much for joining us, Kiah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for having this courageous conversation. This is some really difficult political times that we're in right now, and so there's a lot of fear mongering and a lot of saber rattling and a lot of harsh talk about what's going to happen, what kind of a future we're going to create when it's really ours to determine as much as possible. So one of the things that I think is important to know, so my original background comes from Chicago. And so, yes, obviously Chicago is a big metropolitan urban area, has a lot of different streams of income, but has huge income disparities. And when I first moved to Vermont, one of the things that I was really struck by was the fact that salaries as a whole across the board were significantly less than they are in other parts of the country. Whether you are a frontline worker or an executive, your actual salary is significantly less here than you would find even across the border in Massachusetts or New York, of what I have less than a 10-mile difference between both in my community. This is important for this very key reason. When we have these dialogues around what does a $15 minimum wage mean, not only for I hate using the term working class, because we need to start interrogating a lot of these terms that we use to discuss the human experience here. It's not just our lowest paid workers that are feeling the suppression of an invalidation of someone's work and a lowering of the value of that person's actual, their labor. So we have these arguments that come up all the time. Well, we're very dependent. We have an economy that's just dependent on consumer purchases. And so if we have this minimum wage increase, then suddenly small businesses are going to have to close. Part of the problem is, again, as I said, we have businesses that built a model that was completely reliant on people living at a lower standard of living, having less income that they're able to bring in as a measure of success. And that's something that we have to completely flip on its head, in a culture that we have to really press to change in order to see the growth that's needed. As Isaac was saying, if you have more money in your pocket, then you have more money to spend. And I can say that very distinctly. The number of date nights that my family has versus when I'm making at a certain level versus when I'm not is distinctly different. And those restaurant owners can tell you the last time they saw us there on a regular basis versus when we have these gaps in time because of salary fluctuations. It's real. So one of the other things to know is that this is not an isolated solution. So people speak of this as saying, if that $15 minimum wage, that's what's going to shutter the doors. Right now, people are getting drug out of Capitol buildings over in DC to protest this fact that we have a tax bill that is one of the most comprehensive mechanisms for dismantling so many different functions of our society that are keeping people to be able to have their heads up and have any measure of staying afloat. So many different places that are impacted by this, that this is not by any measure the single thing that is going to impact our economy in moving forward. It is part of an integrated system that we take very seriously here in Vermont. And as legislators, we're working on multiple fronts. We're working on the benefits cliffs. We're working on working conditions. We're looking at what's happening with our tipped earners. We're looking at all of these pieces. There's nothing happening in isolation. So please do understand that we do have a holistic view of this. One of the things that I think is, again, really difficult to swallow is that even the term workforce is really coded in issues of race and class. And it ultimately sets the sort of social paradigm of thinking about whose work is worthy and whose work is not. So you may have a hospital where you have a maintenance worker who works full-time, sometimes overtime, and you may have a physician or a provider at that same hospital that have completely different income scales that they're working from. You cannot, with any good conscience, say that that maintenance worker's work is of less value than that of that healthcare provider. Because in fact, that maintenance worker, because of their low wages, has to deal with the psychological, the physical, the emotional, and the societal stress of not being able to make ends meet. So the burden that they carry is actually much greater than that of the person who's making a significant amount more. But yet that person is asked to wait another day to make more money because your labor is not as important. That is it's a fundamental flaw and a discredit to the human experience that we have to be very clear about, I believe, when we're talking about this. So for me, thinking about what this means to rise to 15, it is a small and important step. And yes, there's going to be some businesses that are going to seriously struggle. Those businesses were struggling anyway. And that doesn't mean that I don't feel their pain. That doesn't mean that I don't have concerns about what that means for them. But the pressures that they're facing and feeling right now without it being at 15 are not going to suddenly vanish because we have put this conversation off for another day. Who else is lost? What other members of our workforce are not a part of building your business to grow to where it needs to be because of the fact that we're not willing to have these conversations and rethink how we're doing business in Vermont? So those are kind of my main comments, I believe, for the moment with regards to this. And I'm happy to take any questions with regards to what I've said so far.
I'm snapping for that. Thank you, Kiah. That's what can I say to follow up on that? Thank you for so articulately putting not only why it's this is a crucial thing to make happen, but how it's part of a much larger and much deeper system that has a lot of ingrained both economic and societal exploitation interwoven in it. Mm-hmm. And yeah, there's not one piece of legislation that ever is the solution, right? The complete dismantling of structural oppression, but these are the ways that we build victory by victory to creating a more just economy, one that values people as people rather than automatons. So I thank you for putting that in such forceful terms. So our last speaker, also a legislator, joining us is Debbie Ingram, who is a little sick right now. So thank you so much for joining us anyways. Really, really appreciate it. Debbie is, she's a founding advisor of Rights and Democracy, and she is also the executive director of Vermont Interfaith Action. And last year was elected for the first time as a state senator from Chittenden County. Debbie's worked for years, really, both in the United States and abroad, to bring a moral compass to community and policy work. And she's brought that same passion, that same fire to her work at the State House. It's been amazing having her, as proud to have her as one of my senators here in Chittenden County. So thank you for joining us, Debbie. You're up. Go ahead.
Great, thanks so much, Isaac. Yeah, I have a bit of a cold, so I apologize to folks for the kind of weird way I sound, but I'm really glad to be able to join you this evening. And all of the arguments that people have made previously, I wholeheartedly agree with. So I don't want to repeat things. So I would just highlight a couple of things that really mean a lot to me. First of all, I kind of wear two different hats. So as executive director of Vermont Interfaith Action, working with faith leaders all over the state, clergy people who see folks, come to their doors and need a little extra help making ends meet for their families from month to month. They have been frustrated and saddened and really outraged by the continuing system that we have that doesn't reward people who are working hard. These people who come to the doors of their congregations are not, people who don't have jobs. They have jobs. Many of them have minimum wage jobs, and they cannot make ends meet. And that's just wrong. I mean, we have at VA, we've been launching a campaign called A Movement Toward a Moral Economy for the last several years. And this raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is a centerpiece of this movement. And so the faith community is really very much behind this measure. And I would just share one story. We just recently did a listening session at the Joint Urban Ministry Project, which operates out of First Congregational Church in Burlington, which is right downtown. And I was talking with a fellow who is kind of a regular client there, and I told him what we're trying to do at the State House, to raise the minimum wage, and his eyes lit up, and he said, "Oh my gosh, if I could make that much money, I could afford to buy food. Afford to buy food, he said, every month. I mean, it's just, it's incredible how people are suffering, and they're working hard. This was a guy who was working, and it's just, this is just something that's long overdue, past due. But also wearing my other hat as a state senator, just about the practicality of whether we can actually get this passed and whether we can actually do this. And if people in the State House actually see the value in this, I'm very encouraged to say that there are many of my colleagues who do see the value in raising the minimum wage. As Isaac already mentioned, the President Pro Tem of the Senate has been a leader on this, but our caucus of progressives and Democrats met recently, and there are many people who are members of that caucus who are very enthusiastic about raising the minimum wage. And I think that we can definitely get the measure passed in the Senate. And then the realities of the political situation is that it has to go through the House, and it has to go to the governor. And we're going to really need the help of people out there who are hopefully, participating in this session tonight, and who listen to this recording in, the days and weeks to come. We're going to really need the help of everybody throughout the state to articulate clearly that this is something that we want, that we need, that we think will really help Vermonters. And I look forward to Rights and Democracy and Isaac and all you good folks continue to put that pressure on all of our decision makers so that they see how important this is.
Effort. There are many organizations who are part of this campaign who really care about lifting up our lowest paid workers in our state. And it's been amazing to see the support that's come from a lot of the organizations that are part of the Raise the Wage Coalition. So thank you, Debbie, for both naming and bringing out like the moral imperative to do this and giving us a bit of a picture of the legislative process. I have a couple of questions that we've received. So I want to bring a few of those forward, and then there are one or two other things that I personally wanted to ask that I think would be great to have addressed. And then I think we might be able to close a little before our 8:30 time. So the first question I wanted to bring forward, and if anyone wants to jump in and answer this, just type in the chat function there, like I can take this so that Shay knows whose audio to turn on. Would be from Cheryl Herrick, who lives in Burlington. And, I think this in some ways has been answered, but if anyone wants to just to talk about and respond to this a little bit, I want to know the community level cost and benefits of the $15 minimum wage. Is it true that this hurts small businesses? If so, how? And what are other levers that need to be in place for the $15 minimum wage to work? What are the other pieces to think about? She kind of is thinking about the way that it may connect to healthcare. So do any of our speakers want to address that question and talk about both the businesses and the way it interplays with other benefits and factors in workers' lives? Also, if Steph wants to join, you're going to have to take my seat.
Yeah.
Oh, Stephanie, great. Okay, come on over here and you can.
If you pause yours, I'll talk from mine. Can you guys hear me from this? So Debbie and Kiah know a lot about this too. So, and I think Kiah made the point that if there's a couple businesses for whom this is really kind of a deal breaker, then, I don't think that changes the calculus of how many people we're helping with the minimum wage increase. So that's sort of, I think there's always talk about a little bit of job loss. Maybe there's a business who can't make it, but the overall impact, the overall positive impact far outweighs the cost of what we're talking about. We're talking about, putting $240 million into the hands of 85,000 Vermonters. That's, if there are businesses that are struggling, yes, we do sympathize, but at the same time, the calculus is worth it, I think. The other thing, though, and this is some of the policy stuff that Debbie alluded to and that I alluded to earlier, is a lot of what came up in the minimum wage study committee, for example, was this benefit cliffs issue. And that, that does continue to be an issue. And it is something that we have a benefit cliffs issue with or without a minimum $15 minimum wage. But there are, it's particularly the child care financial assistance, and particularly those families who are sort of right on the cusp for whom that would make a difference. But we also have a policy solution for it. It's not free, but we have a policy solution for it. And so I think that there are steps that we can take to alleviate those pieces. And again, I don't think we want to use that as a reason not to do this.
Yeah, and I would if you just leave your audio on, I'll use your audio. Okay. To add to that, the Minimum Wage Study Committee was really formed over the summer and fall to look at how do we get to a $15 minimum wage, how do we get to a livable wage, and how do we make sure we do that in a way that benefits as many people as possible and that mitigates any potential harm. And they're recommending getting to a $15 minimum wage sometime in the next 5 or a little bit more than that years. And, again, as we've spoken about here, the sooner we get to a livable wage, the better. But it's great that they're calling for, yes, we need to get to 15. We're well behind a livable wage right now. And then secondly, they're recommending that we use the savings that come from a minimum wage increase to invest that in childcare financial assistance. So that makes a lot of sense. And again, this issue of benefits falling off, we've known about it in Vermont since the 90s. It's really a broken system and one that already exists and should be dealt with no matter what. It's disincentivizing people to work. We should be making the smart kind of investments so that folks can work their way up and are not, hindered from actually taking a promotion or working more hours. And that's something that I think that, the conservative minded folks in the Republican Party should really be on board with. Because they're all about, work your way out of poverty, right? So sometimes you can see that rhetoric doesn't always match up with reality. But that's a really good recommendation of theirs. So I think that'll really help get this through legislation. Is yes, the study committee has looked at how we can do this. They have a great proposal on increasing childcare financial assistance with a minimum wage increase so that this is something that benefits tens of thousands of workers. And that is going to make sure we're taking care of that issue of folks who otherwise would maybe lose out. Which even in that case, it's a few thousand out of 50, 60, 70,000 people that are getting raises. So thank you for bringing that up, Steph. And Kiah, why don't you go ahead next? I saw that you said you wanted to speak about healthcare.
So I do want to speak about healthcare. I do also want to mention something briefly. I think in looking at where does this help and how does this fall into childcare, we also have these other social contracts where, as Elise was speaking at the beginning, the thought is if you go to college and you'll be able to be a higher wage earner and you'll be able to access those jobs that are higher paying. We're one of, I believe, 3 states in the entire country that doesn't provide on-site childcare for any of its state colleges. It's like us, Wyoming, and Guam, okay? So that, I know from my own personal family's experience that was how my mother was able to go to nursing school and graduate valedictorian and get off of welfare, was because I went to that childcare center. So there's things that we're not touching within our social contract of how we presume people are supposed to make it through our meritocracy, right? So the healthcare part, if we were to achieve the goals of Act 48 and do this for real about universal health care so that we can remove that financial and that administrative burden off of our small businesses that are trying to offer benefits from having to do so, that will free up capital in a lot of different ways for them to be able to turn that back into investments into their staff. Now, those are still values that you have to have as a company. You have to still be able to say, we believe that a livable wage is something that people should have. Like, you still have to buy into it. But if as an organization, as a business, as an entity, that is something that you do value and you do want to strive and reach towards, you'll find freedom within not having to deal with those constraints quite as much. And many small businesses have said that. Understanding that the opponents to it are, they're hardcore. The Retail Grocers Association, those people are some of the most powerful lobbyists in the building. Hands down. They beat out Philip Morris. They beat out McDonald's and Coca-Cola. Those are some wide-shouldered folks. We also have the Chamber of Commerce, which again, they come with their bravado, and they are able to shake some trees and really intimidate a number of folks. But most of us are not getting any benefits from anything they have to do. So know that you have legislators that are not beholden to them in any way, shape, or form, but that is a component of how they'll reframe the message. So I just wanted to be able to bring up those two quick points. So I do apologize. And I'd like to let Yannet talk about what she wanted to speak about, I guess.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Yannet, if you could go next.
Okay. Did I get unmuted now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? All right, awesome. So yeah, so I just wanted to add a couple of points about the economic question. Just, I'm sure that you all already have heard this, but about most of the most rigorous studies on the minimum wage over the past 2 decades find that raising the minimum wage does not really lead to any significant job losses. So that's, you have a whole body of research basically for 20 years that have found that. Now, you may say that, well, but this is different because it's a $15 minimum wage proposal. So we don't have studies on what could happen on the economic side from a $15 minimum wage. But there was as I'm sure that you have heard, there was a study from about the Seattle minimum wage increase. The first couple of steps at that point, the study looked at the increase to 13, I believe it was. And I'm sure that you heard that that study found many job losses and lost wages to workers affected by the policy. I think it's worth pointing out for the audience in general that study was severely flawed. It was called out by respected economists for the various severe flaws in the study. And there was actually a competing study to that Seattle study that was much more rigorous, and unfortunately didn't get a whole lot of play in the news, probably because it didn't find these dramatic job losses. But that other study looked at the restaurant industry, which is one of the most impacted industries by minimum wage increases, especially in an area in states like Washington, where there is no tipped wage. Although in Seattle, there's a little bit of a tipped wage that will be phased out eventually. In any case, that other study that did not get a lot of play in the media did actually not find job losses. So that is, again, as we look at the economic impacts, we need to keep in mind who is who's doing the studies, who's doing the analyses, what type of methodology are they employing, and it would be good to sort of, take a look at some of those headlines with a little bit of skepticism, and make sure that we understand, what is being said to us and and who's saying that to us. And one last point on the economic side, I would just say that even though there are not a whole lot of studies that look at what small businesses, how they fare when a minimum wage increase takes place, we do know that, well, not any recent ones, there have been a few older ones, about a decade old or so, but we do have polls that show that even small businesses are in favor of raising the minimum wage. About one of the polls that I'm thinking of from Manta.com actually found that about half of small businesses are in support of a $15 minimum wage. This is a national poll, so it's not necessarily specific to Vermont, but I can't imagine that Vermont businesses would think that much differently than the average small business in the country. So those are just a few points that I wanted to add.
Thank you, Yannet. So I'm kind of reverberating there, aren't I? Okay. I wanted to just bring this back to like human experiences in Vermont. And I did have a few members of ours who had just a statement that they wanted me to share. These were also shared to the Minimum Wage Study Committee earlier this fall. The first is just a statement from an individual who lives in Burlington who didn't actually want to be named for fear of retaliation from his employer. So he just wanted to be identified as Jay. So Jay is a 42-year-old African-American male with a bachelor's degree. And what he wanted to share was the following. I work in the food service industry in Burlington, and the need for a rise in the minimum wage is about more than a paycheck to me. It's about being able to enjoy life rather than working to make ends meet and being too exhausted from work to enjoy life. It's about not living paycheck to paycheck and living with the stress which will make me sick, knowing I can't afford to actually take sick days. It's not about being able to be it's about being able to be more generous with others who have fallen on hard times, like family and friends, or people in places being ravaged by climate change, because sharing what I have is important to me. It's about living in a society where everyone does their part as they're able. A fairer society, not one where I feel I'll never be able to get ahead because I'm not making at least $15 an hour. I want to live a good, active, productive life in Vermont, not just work and exist here. And then I wanted to share one other statement from Hillary Mitchell, who is a working mother of 4, who lives in South Hero, Vermont, and works at the UVM Medical Center. So she states, as a low-wage household, I worry about my children's future, college, transportation, extracurricular opportunities, and stability. No parent wants their child to struggle just to get their basic needs. With a better wage, we wouldn't have to choose between one spouse working and another staying home. I would have a lot more in retirement and wouldn't have to take as long to earn my college degree. Our family could put more back into our local economy and use our earnings to support local businesses, raise money to improve recreational activities for children and people in our town, and contribute to essential programs such as the food shelves in Vermont that have helped our family in a desperate time of need. So I wanted to just share those because I think those are a testament to the lived experience of so many Vermonters in our state who are still struggling on poverty wages. And unless anyone wanted to make a final statement, if so, just you can chat that in and I will back off for a second. I wanted to just close this out with some actions that people can take and a little bit of an update as to what's coming up soon. So no cries of outrage on the chat feed yet. So I'll go ahead and move forward. So the way this is going to happen, like Kiah mentioned, there are many lobbyists pushing against this. We can expect a lot of resistance from the business lobbyists in the State House. And if we want to make sure that our legislators understand the importance of this, that they're hearing from their constituents, we have to be the ones to do it. So we need to be calling our legislators, emailing our legislators. You can find them very easily on the legislature's website, which is legislature.vermont.gov. You can find any of your legislators' home phone numbers and their emails, and it is perfectly fine for you to contact them. That's our duty as citizens, is to be able to push our legislators to adopt the policies that we think are important. We do still have the trappings of democracy, and it's even stronger in Vermont than it is nationally. So I encourage folks to be able to do so. We will be organizing further events for folks to learn and get involved during the legislative session. I'm very hopeful, and I think Debbie helped spell out the real opportunity that we have to move a minimum wage increase through the Senate and the House in the coming session and push it onto Phil Scott's desk. What's encouraging also, he has not said that he would veto a minimum wage increase, though he does take every opportunity to disparage raising the minimum wage and use scare tactics to talk about how it won't benefit people. So I think we need to be putting pressure on Phil Scott. We need to be contacting our legislators and telling them why this is important to us. If you have a personal experience or story yourself or a loved one or someone you know who is experiencing inadequate wages, you can share your story through a form that we have. If you go to the Raise the Wage Coalition on Facebook, you just search Vermont Raise the Wage Coalition. You can find that very easily. We have a story form you can fill out, and then we'll help follow up and get you to get your story out to the public and get it to legislators, depending on if you're comfortable with that. And there will be opportunities to testify at the State House during the next legislative session from January through May. So it's going to have to be all hands on deck if we want to have this happen. We'll be rallying at the State House on the first day of the legislature on the State House steps around a number of important issues that we can move in the next legislative session. So stay tuned for that. And if you want to learn more about the Raise the Wage campaign, you can find the Facebook page. You can go online and go to raisethewagevt.wordpress.com. And you can also sign on to Rights and Democracy's campaign to raise the minimum wage and get better worker protections in our state and past paid family leave. That's our Raise Up Vermont campaign. So if you go to radvt.org, that's radvt.org, and just look under Raise Up Vermont, you can find that. You can sign up and you can share your story there as well. I want to thank again everyone who joined us to speak tonight. Elise for sharing her story and her perspective. Stephanie, you and Yannet Lathrop for sharing your very well-researched analysis. And Kiah Morris and Debbie Ingram for giving us a picture of the imperative to do this, both from a social justice and an economic standpoint, and helping be our voice in the State House. We're going to keep counting on your support, on you championing important issues like these, and we're lucky to have folks like you in there representing us. So thank you again. Thanks for everyone who called in. If you have follow-up questions, you can definitely you can email me at isaac@radvt.org. You can also pose those questions at our Facebook page or on the website. So stay tuned for what's coming up next. We have a real opportunity to win on critical legislation on raising the minimum wage in the next session, but we got to stay involved, we got to stay tuned, and we got to stay active and push to make it happen, because without a movement, we're not going to win big on issues like this. So thank you all again for being in with us, and we'll be following up with everyone and look forward to seeing folks at the State House when the next legislative session starts. And happy holidays till then. Thank you.